Hey Nadir, hey Peter. Thanks for joining my little show, Dadsense. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Subhasis. It's good to be on the other side and not be worrying about how the recording is gonna happen and all of that. Nader and
Yeah,
I don't
that's
have to stress about anything at the moment, so that's good. It's a good feeling.
As you can see, we are leaning back, which means we are relaxed. We are
and
here to
I'm
just chat.
and I'm leaning in.
Exactly. The roles have reversed. That's normally our
Yeah,
job. But today we feel great that we're on the other side. So fire away.
that's great. You remind me of my own job. I'm in recruiting, right? So a lot of times I interview other candidates, but actually that interview is way better than me going for a job interview, I must say. So I'd rather be on the interviewer side on that context. But I absolutely resonate with what you're saying. Just hang back, chill. I will do the hard work, and you can just just respond. But on the serious note, thanks so much for joining. I know we'll exchange notes about how your journey started, but I'll share with you how I came to know about you both. And as we were just talking just before the show, I became a dad when I used to live in the U.S. and it was back in 2011, about 12 years back. And honestly, my initiation into parenting was through podcasts. And I listened to a lot of podcasts on parenting, and I would just learn on the go and on the fly. And eventually, we moved back to India in 2015, and we had two children back by then. And I came back here, and of course, you can listen to your podcast anywhere in the world, but I noticed exactly what Peter you're saying about why aren't there any dad podcasts in this country? I mean, the aha moment that you both had was not an aha moment I had, but I had a question. And I just kind of looked around, and it was in 2015. I don't know if when you guys started, I literally didn't find much. And I had this idea. I'm like, okay, maybe it's an opportunity for me to do something with, talk to other dads. And I think that's maybe a year from there, you guys ended up meeting and starting this show. And I actually I got to know about you from that day onwards, actually, and I, started listening to a little bit, a few conversations here and there, and I've been just kind of watching you guys build on this for the last several years. And my first reaction or first point to you both is thank you for doing this over the last several years. It's definitely much needed in this country. And I can't imagine how many dads and moms and how many families you've impacted. So thank you.
Thanks for that opening, Subhasis. I'm pretty sure we haven't impacted those many lives, but the the goal is to reach as many people as possible, and it's also thanks to dads like you who are also coming on the bandwagon and doing the same thing. So we really appreciate that you're helping us and every other dad who's trying out there to build this community, because that's exactly what we need to do: build the awareness,
Yep.
let people know that parenting is not a one-person job.
Right.
It's a two-member job.
That's right. Absolutely. Yep. Great. We will obviously bounce around and go into different places in our conversation, but I usually would love to start by getting to know a little bit about your own childhood. So, if you don't mind, to the extent that you feel comfortable, share a little bit about your childhood, each of yours, and kind of we will start the journey there, and we'll go from there.
So I think mine will be more colorful. So let's start off with that one. So while I may not be technically a third culture kid, I kind of identify as that because I've grown up between United Arab Emirates and India, split kind of evenly almost. My childhood, formative years in UAE, moved to India, went back to do my 11th, 12th, much to my dismay because in the 11th and 12th, actually in UAE, you wear a uniform in the Indian school there. And I was so looking forward to dressing up in jeans and whatever, the baggy jeans, which was back then the trend and all of that.
Right.
Further then, as most Indian kids, I aspired to go abroad and further my education. So I spent a couple of years in Toronto at the University of Toronto studying there. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but my dad and all said that I showed an aptitude towards subjects like accounting and things like that. So I picked up a degree in business administration. And I think that was like one of the first points in my life. I was 18 years old in a country where I had nobody that I knew other than immediate family. And for me, that was one of those turning points in my life, because it's, when you're left to your own devices is when, truly you kind of realize what kind of person you are and all of that, right?
That's right.
And long story short, I kind of didn't enjoy education there, because you know how when you're in India or in UAE, you see the stories of lockers and, no carrying books to classes and all that kind of stuff, the canteen and all of that. I had that life. But the education system I had back then in a university found no different. So I moved back to UAE, ended up finishing my degree. And till then, I had no idea, what my life would kind of be like, because I had no idea in terms of career options and things like that. And, this is still, I'm going to age myself here when I say that you always knew that, engineer, doctor, lawyer, you had to find professional, right? And this is like, even till the mid 2004-5, no one ever talked about advertising or marketing as a role or as a job.
Yeah.
So the only thing I enjoyed doing was event management, and that was my early foray into kind of like marketing and all of that, working on events. So yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey. If you had told me as an 18-year-old that I would actually end up living in India, I would have laughed at you, because my aspirations were only in the West.
Right.
But yeah, life is funny, right? You end up starting one journey but end up in another place. So yeah, that's my
Right.
life kind of in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, you seem to have had a lot of exposures and experiences, and we'll talk more about that, how it shaped your own worldview. But yeah, I can imagine having lived in different countries. It resonates with me about how you come to your own, and when you're with nobody, you just kind of go a little bit more within you, and in terms of searching for who you are. So I can relate to that. Nadir, how about you? How's your childhood?
I think if I had to use a term to describe my childhood, I would say very harbored. I felt protected. Obviously, there was a certain privilege attached to.
I was in Bombay, yeah?
Yeah, that's in Mumbai. So there was a certain privilege attached to growing up. We got everything that we needed. We were very comfortable, right? So the sense of struggle wasn't real, as they say, right?
Yeah.
It was a good life. Still is. No complaints. There are so many things in retrospect when you think that we are so fortunate, right, to have certain things in our lives, and it's only after years and years and years that you've lived, you suddenly feel that, wow, I had all of this and I continue to
right.
have this, right?
Particularly when you
Um,
become a dad, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
your childhood comes back, and I'm like, holy cow! Like, I had a good life. And
Correct,
my
exactly,
parents
right?
did a good job.
And when your kid, when you compare that to your child and the way he or she is growing, you constantly compare that.
That's
Man,
right.
she's getting XYZ. I didn't even have that, but it's very stupid to do that kind of comparison, like how our parents used to
It
do.
is.
I walked 10 kilometers to go to the.
I
Yeah,
started
because there was no transport
there was no
system,
electric
right, in
light
that
and all that stuff.
country. So for me, I think I had a pretty harbored childhood. Grew up in a very typical joint family. Lived with parents, grandparents, a younger sister. I'm pretty proud to say that I think in that setup, the way my mom raised my sister felt like I was the girl child, and she was the boy child because she got all the privileges, all the freedom which I didn't get when I was younger, like going alone
Is
here
she
and
older
there.
to you?
No,
She's the
she's
older
younger than
one?
me.
Oh, she's
She's
younger.
younger.
Wow.
She's younger than me. Yeah. So I think my mom quickly realized that okay, we did
Right.
certain things with the first kid, second kid. I'm not taking any chances. Let's just give them a little more freedom. A lot of learnings, of course, a lot of learnings, which now is kind of taking place, right? So unlike Peter, I've always stayed in India. I had no aspirations, zero aspirations to leave this country. I
Right.
remember my dad and I had this chat after I gave my 10th boards. He said, "Let's go for breakfast," which is something that my dad would never, say. So when something like that happens, it's serious talk, right? So you have to be mentally prepared. So we went for breakfast. We sat down. He's like,
Do you remember where you
Peter,
went?
yeah, we went to this really nice local place in Bhindi Bazaar where you get lovely keema pav and that nice Irani chai. And we sat there, and I
Oh,
forget the name
it's
of
a
the place. I
beautiful
think it was called Paradise or
guy.
Star of UP or one of those. I think it still exists. And he just said, "You want to go? Everyone around you is going to the US and doing computers." And I said, "Daddy, I got like barely scraped through in computers in school. What am I going to do?" It's stupid, right? Yeah, I'm just saying, I can afford it right now, so I can send you abroad. Think about it. And what had happened? There was something that clearly happened, and I picked it up from experience that people around me, boys, mostly boys around me, friend circle and family also, 3 or 4 years older than me, they went to the US and they did not have great experiences. So they
Yeah.
started coming back. And I think that sort of played somewhere on my mind that, wow, man, what a waste of money. I can't let my dad spend so much money waste on me. And what if I come back, right? So there was always this negative
Right.
loop in my head. But honestly, the real answer was no, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to be right here because, it's comfortable. And you hear these stories, you'll be alone and you'll have to do this and you'll have to do that and blah blah blah. So I said, no, I'm going to stay here. So my dad had this idea that okay, great, he's staying here, now he can join the family business. I didn't do that either. I didn't join the family business because I hated doing business. I've seen how my dad does business. I'm like, yeah, no way I'm getting into business. I can't do this, pushing people and yelling and shouting, and I can't do this. So then I got into media, and ever since I decided to get into media, I've always been a media professional. I've always done media, various forms, and I've just enjoyed it, and I've just kept learning through the years, and I've just been that kid, even now at almost 40 years old, I feel like that kid that, yeah, I want to
Yeah.
learn, I want to keep learning, I want to keep learning. And yeah, that's how my childhood has been. I just feel that my childhood still hasn't ended because deep down I still feel I'm that kid.
Yes.
I know I'm growing old, but I'm still that kid. That curiosity is still there. People used to always call me, "Kitna sawal puchta hai ye aadmi?" But that's the whole point. If you don't ask
Right.
questions, you don't get answers.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, that's fascinating. I think I'm just again thinking about both of you doing this kind of the podcast together, and you both come at this from such different backgrounds, which is always cool, right? Because you get these different perspectives. Thanks for sharing. How's your dad? I know you talked about. I mean, this question is for both of you. Just feel free to pick up either of you. How's your relationship with your dad and mom? Who influenced you more, and how has that sort of carried through your own roles as dads and parents?
Again, I think my answer is going to be kind of shorter. I actually like I said, right, picking up from my previous answer, was with my parents from age, since I was born till about age 6 or 7, and with UAE, like since we were on visit visas or residence visas, my dad had changed jobs, and there was a problem kind of sponsoring me or getting me on his visa. So I was supposed to actually stay in India for, I think, a few months or a year. And my dad said, since he's there, why don't since my grandmom lived here in Bombay. So I enrolled in a
Right.
school here, and 1 year became 10 years. So when I lived with my parents, I was a 6-year-old. And when I went back to live with my parents, I was a 16-year-old. And
Wow.
like most 16-year-olds, I was rebellious, angsty. I mean, to a certain extent, I remember that first couple of months sitting in a room with my dad, and we're related by blood, but I'd never like spent that much time with him, right? I'd never lived with him. My parents, again, are very conservative people. Again, they left India in the 80s, right? So a lot
Yeah.
of what they saw of India or their upbringing in India was still in the 80s, right?
Right.
Whereas in that time, in that decade or two, India had moved far more, right? So a lot of their references of parenting
which you had experienced, right, growing up.
exactly, right? So
Right.
just the whole bit of liberalization, the whole commercialization, going out, all of that. And to a certain extent, all of that was just part of popular culture, was very similar by the time I went back to UAE, right? Movies, all of those things we
Yep.
had access to in India
Shows.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah, shows and stuff like that. And I think like that initial 6 months was really tough because, here are these people who are your parents, but you don't actually have a relationship with them. And just kind of adjusting to that. For me also, the idea was this was a different life to what I had chosen, right? Or I had envisioned. I didn't want to be going to a school wearing a uniform and stuff like that. I was supposed to be like bunking college, all those kind of
You're
first
thinking like
experiences
St.
that you
Xavier's College, Bombay,
had. Yeah,
and the
yeah,
whole
yeah. I mean,
atmosphere there.
it's so funny that you say it, but I used to play basketball, and one of the colleges actually that were after me to join them so that I could play part of the team was actually St. Xavier's.
Oh, there you go.
So all that entire experience, right? So for me, it was also that first 6 months realizing that, hey, you know what, they're my parents. They know what's better for me. And of course, this is all me also reflecting and looking back, right? And talking as a parent myself.
Yes.
But back then, I didn't know any different. And especially that I remember that 2 years was, to a certain extent, a crash course in what I had not experienced in 10 years, right? So you go through the fights, the makeup, the highs and lows, all of that you have with your parent, and I experienced that in 2 years. What also helped is those 2 years I had with my siblings, who I'd also not lived with, right? So having all of that, and between the ages of 16 and 18, first of all, you're going through your own identity and trying to figure that out, but at the same time,
Absolutely.
now you have these other people that are also part of this, right? And you're figuring out where does your identity lie in this family unit of yours also, right? So all of that was kind of happening. And even when I went to Canada, I remember studying there. That's when I really felt that, hey, listen, I'm away from my parents. That was the first time in my life kind of realizing that, right? But at the same time, it also brought to mind what my parents kind of did when they were not too much older, right? When they moved to another country. My mom always talked about, the loneliness about living, because she moved after she got married, so she had no family, nobody. I could suddenly slowly relate to what she was talking about, the loneliness of living in a country where you don't know many people, making friends, all of that. And I think that kind of like also, so like they say, distance makes the heart fonder. That kind of happened. But unfortunately, when I moved back to UAE a couple of years later, I lost my mother. So
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, so I was about 23 when I lost my mother, and that kind of has completely changed. Of course, just the basic relationship I have with my dad, because I went from a father-son relationship to someone who suddenly was also kind of filling in, and I'm the eldest of 3, so I lost my mom in my last semester of university, and there was a sudden shift that happened in my mind also. I mean, I was very fortunate that, my dad was still had a job, had everything going for him. But again, when I'm looking back in retrospect, there was so much that could have been different, right?
Yeah.
And especially when it's the elder son and the expectations and stuff like that. But since then, so much has changed. I mean, like, I've spent more time with my dad than my mom, but a lot of the stuff I remember, and that's why I say, like, those 3-4 years when I was post teenage that I got to spend with my mom easily is one of the most impactful in my life. I mean, like, as a parent, I keep going back sometimes to those experiences and those things. But yeah,
that's fascinating.
Definitely, like, I would say, like, that has had a huge shift on just my relationship with my dad, right? And I remember even, it's funny, I was having a conversation with him, I think about 3 or 4 years ago when my son was already born, and my dad was talking about something about my brother and sister, and I said, Dad, I totally know where you're coming from because I'm a parent too now. And he suddenly realized, and he said, our parents have that thing, na, jab tum baap banoge to tum samjhoge. It was like that
Correct.
moment, as cliche as it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's how I would kind of sum up, right? I mean,
That's great.
Of course, like
thanks
with
for sharing that.
any-
It's
I've
sorry,
actually
please complete.
honestly never talked about this that much on public, let alone on a podcast. I think maybe a couple of times we've addressed it on our podcast. But it's I think, like, a lot of these things you look back retrospectively, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of reflect on your experiences. I mean, like, with any relationship between parents and child, there's always ups and downs, right? And
Yeah.
I think what's the most important is throughout that you just remember the positives and the ups than anything else, right? That's
Yeah.
how I look at it.
Well, I was trying to picture, like, the whole journey. Usually, kids grow up with their parents, right? And then they leave. Yours sort of, went in the other direction, right?
Yeah.
And having experienced that life away from them and then going and living with them would have been such a fascinating experience for you. Finding your connection, and they're your parents, finding your connection, by the same time you're sort of coming on your own. It's really, I'm not saying I can relate to it, but I'm trying to sort of associate on your experience. Fascinating. We'll come to, and I have another follow-up question which I'll hold off. I'll connect that to how did that shape your own parenting. We'll come back to that.
Definitely.
But Nadir, I know you started talking about your dad and the breakfast. How would you describe your relationship with him and your mom, and share a little bit about that?
So again, typical household, right? Mom, homemaker, dad, earner, took over granddad's business. So I broke the chain, which is great because now he thanks me. He thanks me for doing that. He's like, yeah, I understand that you went on your own path because you're doing so much. And he acknowledges it, which is all that a son.
All that you're seeking for, yes.
Yeah, I mean, when you're growing up, typical Indian household, with the way dads were back then, right, in the 80s and 90s. I'm not saying all dads were like that, but majority of the dads were like that, right? Report card में क्या number आए तेरे, और weekend पे चलो lunch dinner, and then Monday to Friday again there's not much contact because he's at work, I'm in school, I go sleep early, so hardly any interactions, right? Your mom's always there, even today mom's always there, right? But my father taught me some very tough lessons, which I'm so glad that I've put that in perspective. Sorry, I've put that in use today. When it comes to money, especially, he used to always tell me, buy only things that you need.
Right.
You don't have to get obsessive about constantly getting things.
Stuff.
And I grew up like that. Today, I just don't feel the need to do, shopping therapy. That's not who I am. That's not how I define myself, and that also helps you choose your partner as well, right? Sometimes, and when you get a
Yes.
partner like that, it's because of all the learnings that you've got from your parents. Um, my mom likes nice things. My sister likes nice things. So they obviously, took a different path. But for me, I was very clear. So my dad, when it came to money, the relationship was very different, right? I did end up working with him though for 3 years when I was,
Hmm.
in my
That's cool.
formative teen years. Yeah, yeah, yeah. For 3 years, and because that's when I realized I don't want to do business because I can't work like this. This is not the way you
So
work.
I mean, you learned because you worked there, right? You didn't sort of have a hypothesis and you just kind of followed it, right? That's
Not at
cool.
all.
Yeah.
As a person also, I've always I always push this philosophy. Although in my 20s, for some reason, that entire decade, I just missed out because I was just blindly saying no to everything. But then in my 30s and like late 30s now, I believe it so strongly that if you don't try it, you won't know whether you want to do it or not, right?
Right.
And it just works. So I did work with my dad, but I guess because I was forced to. But then I did that. I did whatever I could, and then I realized, yeah, I
You can't do
can't do this.
this.
Like,
Yeah.
this is not possible.
Yeah.
Because there's this weird pressure on you that, oh, the third generation, you have to expand the business. No, I don't want to expand anything. I just want to be myself. I don't want to do, but I don't want to be enterprising in that sense. So that was my relationship with with my with my father, and like every Indian dad,
Yeah.
even my dad had, we have these awkward moments, even though we live, in his house. This is his house, it's not my house, right? So that's where the privilege comes in, and that's where that respect comes in. That he's done so much in his life to build this, to give us that life, and I'll never forget that. I will always be thankful because in today's day and age, it is not easy to do what my dad probably did back then because the
Yeah.
value of money was very different compared to what it is right now, right? When people who are employed tell me, मुझे बहुत सारा पैसा कमाना है, तो like you can't be employed, you have to do business for that to make that kind of money, right? I just find it so odd when people say that. I'm very happy, and that is what I learned from my dad. Like, be content, be happy with what you have, right? Don't go for these obsessive things. It's not gonna help.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that. But I think if I had to draw another parallel, I also took a lot of inspiration from my granddad.
Hmm.
My granddad was one crazy guy, right? Worked till the age of 72. Um, has never had a hot water bath from what I know of him. Never. Only cold water baths. In
And
winter
now,
as well.
and now the whole world is talking about cold exposure and cold therapy, right?
Imagine, right? My granddad did that back then. Only
Yeah.
cold water baths. And I was like, what is this? Like, how is this comfortable, right? And he would keep telling us, "No, no, thanda pani se nahana," and all of that. And he was this, he wouldn't, he refused to buy any form of vehicle, right? So I think this whole form of effective altruism sort of comes from him in a way,
Yeah.
because he would travel by bus, he would walk for kilometers, he would travel by bus, but he would walk back home in the evening. So he was fit. He was fit.
That's incredible.
Yeah, he was like, and that, now when I look back and I was like, that's what I want to be. He didn't lose his hair till the age of 92. That's fine. I think that also has to do with genes, but the fact that he took cold showers, I think that also had a big thing to play with, right? Very clean lifestyle. Was a huge sugar addict though, but otherwise very clean lifestyle.
I
And
think
the
you learn a lot
stories
of
that he,
ethics, right, from these
yes,
kind of
discipline.
lifestyles. Yeah,
I
discipline
learned
and
discipline from my
yeah,
granddad.
yeah,
That this was a discipline. This is how he did. He would wake up at 5:30 in the morning. He would pray. He would offer his namaz,
yeah.
and then the day starts off. And he worked till the age of 72 till my dad took over. He just
That's
kept working, and he kept doing whatever that he could. And I think he was the outlier in my family, which everyone was hoping that Nadir will do something great. No, Nadir's not going to do jack, right? Because Nadir has a very clear vision in his mind. This is what he wants to do. This is how he wants to live his life, right? So I think my granddad was a true outlier, and I think that's very fascinating that you have this kind of a personality in your family, and I'm very proud of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All of us are very like normies, normal people. My granddad wasn't. He was a great guy.
But I
So
think, I guess,
there's a
like,
lot to grow.
I think, like Peter said, like, the more you grow, the more you appreciate some of these influences, right?
Yes.
Like maybe 20 years back, you didn't think so much about your granddad's lifestyle, right? It was like given to you. Now, as you're living through life, you're like, holy cow, this guy did the coolest things, which is of so much value to me.
Did.
Yeah.
This whole entrepreneurship, he was the guy who actually did. He built it for himself. And they always say, right, there is a third generation who ruined it. So I think I'm that guy.
No, you did not. I'm sure they're proud. They're proud of what you're doing.
Yeah. In a different context altogether. When it comes to business, because see, again, the community that I belong to, right? Even if you do a small business, it's okay, right? But if you're doing a job and you earn 100x, we're like, nahi, naukri kar raha hai wo also.
Yeah, I relate to that. I'm actually the same guy. I broke the chain. I come from an entrepreneur family in Orissa, and my dad had factory, and he thought it's default. I'm going to run this, and I basically wanted to run as far as I could from all of that. And eventually, if there's some uncanny resemblances between your story and mine, Nadir, because eventually he's like, wow, actually, you're right. You would have just, what you've chosen and what you're doing, I never saw that and never could imagine that. And he appreciated what I was doing, and that was the bit of a moment for me, because you're always seeking that validation from your hero, right? Which you never tell them. You're going to secretly seek that validation and approval. And I can totally relate to that. Thank you. We'll come to your being parents in a minute, but I was just wanted to circle back with Peter on your influences that you had, Peter. And did that unique sort of relationship timings and how you've connected with your mom and then eventually connected with your dad, how did that shape on how you parent now that you're a dad, in terms of what you do and what you choose not to do and so forth? Is there something that I know we don't think about it, but just intuitively?
Yeah, I've spent actually, I'd say the last 2-3 years reflecting on it a lot more than I ever did. Because, to be honest, and I think it's very strange, right? Because Nadir and I started the podcast at the start of 2020. 3 months later, we also then went into a lockdown. So 2020 was like two things happening to me exactly at the same time. One is, you have so much time to reflect on your life and your journey. And at the same time, I also had this creative outlet, which was the podcast Pops in a Pod that we started. So a lot of what I did channeled into that. And I think, like I talked to you about moving back with my parents at age 21, from 21 to, I'd say, like the next decade or so, or even longer, it was just like doing, right? There's no stopping. And I think that also is kind of the person I am, right? Because for me, it's do as much as possible. Like I'm one of those people who have like always 12 things on their task list or to-do list, even though I can only do 6, but I like to have things to do. Not finding that kind of break or time to kind of reflect, which is one of the things I realized, right? And coming to your question, I think I'm very the opposite. So I think like a lot of what I do as a parent is directly the opposite of what my parents did. Like my wife and I have had multiple conversations about it. I've even gone to the extent where a lot of times I say that I don't think my son has as much separation anxiety as I do. And it's very strange, but I think
separation anxiety from him.
Yeah. So like I remember, because we were there together with him in school, lockdown and stuff like that, I remember like there have been times, and I think Nadir knows this, I've actually talked about this. I've actually done work meetings sitting in his class. And of course it was tough for him to kind of adjust to the play school and stuff like that. But I was very comfortable sitting in there because I was like, yeah, at least now I know what's happening with him. But I would say that over a period of time, I kind of had to reflect on it, understand where it's stemming from, and realizing that, wait, because of the experiences I went through as a child, of course, I'm not going to be doing very similar things in my lifetime as a parent. So that's covered. So now, how do I kind of draw that healthy boundary in there?
So which
but
is what?
also when
Which is what, Peter? Like, you didn't want to be away from him, right? Is that what you?
Yeah. So just
Right.
finding
Yeah.
that thing of, say, for example, like when it came to school. So a lot of times, say, I would find myself being a little more worried when he was in school, saying, hey, is he okay? Is something happening to him?
Right.
Like last year, my son moved to an all-boys school, and I remember talking to my wife and saying, wait, I was around his age when I moved to an all-boys school. I know what all-boys schools are like. I know what it's like
Yep.
to be the new guy. I know what it's like
new
to be
kid, yep.
bullied. And I mean, I grew up in Bombay in the 90s. Bullying was rampant in boys' schools, right?
Yep.
But then also, having said that, realizing that, hey, this is not the 90s, right? Kids are not being bullied as such in schools like they were. So also realizing that my experiences were very different, and kind of realizing that. But also realizing that, because I came from a very conservative family, so there was a certain outlook I had towards various things, right? Whether it comes to things like religion or, respecting elders and things like that. There was a very clear role distinction. And, that can also be very restrictive when
Yes.
I look back in retrospect. So that was one of the initial things. So having said that, I also took some of the things that I realized my dad did, and I want to paint a picture for you. This I've definitely spoken about on our podcast, Pops in a Pod, and especially so when I got my own dad on the podcast, where imagine in the 90s, an Indian man sitting in the kitchen making breakfast for his son.
Yeah.
That didn't even exist in India, but that's what my
right.
dad was doing in Abu Dhabi. Like, my earliest memories of him are of him making breakfast, getting me ready for school. So when it came to me, I said, of course I'm going to get my son ready for school. Of
Right.
course I'm going to make breakfast for him. Like, my dad did that. There's nothing wrong in that.
There's nothing
Or-
crazily different about it, right? It was
Yeah.
very common, very normal for you.
Exactly, because I saw that, right?
Yeah.
My dad would also, I know, despite him coming and spending an entire day at work, would come and say, hey, you like cricket. So would say, okay, you go bat, I'll bowl to you, and would spend that some time
Wonderful.
with me. So much so that, like, a few years ago, my dad was in town for the opening match of the Indian Premier League, IPL. So I actually took him for that match. And it was great
cool.
just to see him, but it was also a full circle, because I realized he instilled this love of the game in me. So, of course, it's a great feeling to take him for that. So I'd say, like, there are a lot of things, good and bad, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's taking that moment and just reflecting on and picking, like I said, what you want to continue, what you noticed as a parent, and what you want to just draw a line and say that this is not what I'm going to do, right?
Thanks for sharing. I know it's some of this stuff we don't think about it, but that's what I find sort of very profound about when we connect the dots. We kind of learn our own insights about how we might be operating as parents. Let's flip to I know we probably have answered this question 100 times. How did this idea of a dad podcast come about? What was the moment, and what prompted you guys to do this?
So, no plugs. The podcast origin has to do with an Ola or an Uber cab and a phone call. But all of this predates it by, say, I think about 18 months or so. So for some context, Nadir and I worked at an agency together. And I still very vividly remember Nadir on his first day when he came to the office was introduced to me as this recent dad. And everyone in the
Right.
office knew that my wife was in her last trimester. So they're like, oh yeah, friends and stuff like that. And sure enough, they were right. We hit it off because Nadir was this rich treasure trove of experiences as a recent dad. And I still remember very vividly also the coffee breaks that we would have. At every coffee break, Nadir would have a story or an incident or something to tell me. And he would always refer me to his blog, which was titled The New Age Dad. And
Nice.
I remember going back to it. And what I really enjoyed about Nadir's blog was that it wasn't, how to do. It was always what he did. And he left you with, okay, you figured this out and all of that. Which was very different because, like we were discussing at the start, there weren't many resources for dads from an
Right.
Indian context. I mean, my wife gave me to read What to Expect When You're Expecting.
When you're
Right.
expecting, yeah.
So
I think everyone's wife did that.
Yeah.
So, fast forward 18 months, I had moved on to a different agency, but because the friendship was there, we would still be on and off, exchanging notes, what's happening with our kids and stuff like that. And on the sideline, I had heard about podcasts happening. There was a kind of wave coming in India. But the turning point was I had gone to this event where I saw it was just primarily moms. And the only thing the dads were doing was, carrying the bags, the kids. There was a coffee shop, so they were there. And I said, this is so strange because this is a very different reality from what I'm seeing. I know Nadir, and I'm pretty sure there are a few other dads who are also quite involved. This is not reflection of the life I'm kind of leading. So I honestly, in retrospect, did not think one bit. I just called up Nadir and I said, hey, what's up? What are you doing? I said, hey, you want to make that blog that you have into a podcast? And I'm going to let Nadir take over the story because I'm very glad whatever he responded right after that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think there was no thinking. I was like, yeah, let's do it because this is one thing that both Peter and I was so extremely passionate about that. As I said, we didn't, you don't miss a beat thinking about these things. You're living that life, right? And the fact that there's such a huge gap, there's this yawning gap, right, in parenting content where there's just nothing. So I'll give you incidences. When we started researching, right, that okay, let's do this. How are we going to do this? So we took a year just to do our research.
Sure.
Like any self-respecting person out here who wants to do some good research, you go to Google, right? So we went to Google and we typed fathers of whatever, India, fathers, something.
Right.
And we would get these weird hits. Father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. Father's Day. Something father of somewhere, I think somewhere some World War II something came up. Like weird
So
content. right?
basically not much.
Nothing, right? And then you just type parenting and it'll say mom, mother, mama, mom, mother, 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 mother. And I was like, wow, what this is weird, right? Like, how is this happening? And that's when we realized that, okay, something needs to be done. And we just did it. We said, okay, let's do it, but we're not going to rush into it. Took a year. We did our research. We put together 53 topics because we had decided that we'll do one episode per week.
Yep.
So we came up with 53 topics for that 1 year. And we were like, yeah, we're sorted. Now let's get to the technical side of things. So we did multiple recordings. We shared with friends and family. We got them to hear it. We got feedback. So if you listen to our earlier episodes, God, I think we'll definitely re-record a lot of those episodes again. Pretty sure we're going to do that. But just from a technical standpoint, I come from production background, so at least I knew something. But when you actually get into it and do it for yourself, right, it's not easy. It's really because you don't have any kind of guidance. Peter and I were the only guiding force for each other. Right. So that window is so small in any case. So we just kept trial and error. Okay, your levels are not good. Can you do this? Can you do that? Let's get a mic. Let's go to Starbucks or let's go here. Let's go. We kept trying until we got it right. And now it's just easy, right? Like people say that how do you keep your content so fresh? Because we are dads. We do this every single day.
New things
right?
happen every day.
Yeah, we don't go to our wives and ask, "Acha, aaj kaun sa topic karna chahiye? Kya kiya tune? Batana zara." No, that's not who we are. That's not
Right.
what we do.
Yeah.
Right? We live a certain life as a parent, we identify as parent first, professionals later, right? That's the change that has come about in our lifestyle, because we are so proud of who we are and what we do for our kids. And that reflects in our content, in the way we speak, in the way we want to structure our conversations with other people. And yeah, it took us 4 years to get there, right? So it didn't happen overnight. I'm not going to use the word success. It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's taken us 4 years to get where we are even today, and yet our kids are like 6 years, 7 years old, and there's so much more to go. There's so much more to do, and we've met really interesting people just like yourself,
Yeah.
who's sharing their stories with us, and vice versa. So the podcast has become this great highlight for us, because we're doing something great for the community. We're making money out of it.
Right.
In fact, we spend more money than generating anything. We didn't do it for the money. That's the beauty
Yeah. Yeah.
of this concept, because
Absolutely.
money was not the end goal. It was just sharing content. It was just providing answers to a platform to other people who felt the same way. And yeah, it's taking time. It's very slow, glacial speed.
Yeah, I know.
Hopefully, we'll get there soon.
Well, thank you. That's definitely inspiring, and I think this approach of one thing that it's I think the parents will really understand this, that no parents will say I'm a successful parent, right? Like there's nothing called success or failure, right? It's just like every day
Please
you
tell
wake
us
up,
what you're doing there.
every day you wake up and learn, right? So like you think about like podcasting, right? Like a topic. There is it's like a sports podcast or a movie whatever, right? And usually those podcasters are experts in that space. But that's one thing that's refreshingly not true about this, because parenting is nothing like you come here as an expert, right? Like, I'm going to tell you how parenting looks like. And that's what I find very cool about like even wanting to do this, because you just kind of want to chat with other dads and moms or whatever and then learn. It's not because you figured this out and you're here just kind of going to share your gyan to others. So I love that you both are on that journey, and I totally relate to that. Well, one of the things that I've been curious to hear from you guys is, as I mentioned in the beginning, just the width of topics. I think you chose 53. Now that 53 has become, 250 something like that. So,
Just 200.
so do you have like two questions actually? One is, how are you seeing, this whole parent, like dad's, dad space changing in this country in the last 3 years? You met a lot of dads, you met a lot of, educators, doctors, name it, right? What are the key things that you're seeing in the community of parents, and what would you like to share with, let's say, folks who are going to listen to this in terms of what you've learned over the last few years? Does that make sense? Or
I mean, I'm trying to see how do you condense like 170 odd episodes into a short
I know. It's an unfair question.
Yeah. No, but I'll tell you one thing, right? And I think we started off very clearly saying that Nadir and I are not alone. And I think in the last 4 years, every year when Nadir and I do a roundup episode and we look back at all the episodes we recorded, it just reinforces that idea for me that we're not alone, right? Yeah, let's be honest, right? And I think it has to do with a mix of culture, but also emotional, like we talked about earlier. You don't find dads putting up stories or rants or anything like that, right? Especially from an Indian perspective. And this is something we initially thought was just India, but we've talked to dads in the UK and it's very similar. We've talked to dads from the Indian diaspora, and you think that, Indians going abroad, your mindset changes and stuff like that. Sometimes you realize you're more closer than you actually think, right?
Yep.
So I'd say like we've found these tribe of dads, as I'd like to kind of call us, right? Who think differently. I mean, honestly, if you don't think alike to Nadir and me are not there, you are not a guest on our podcast, period, right? So it's been that journey where we're finding these dads. There's not been a dad that we've had a guest who've not shared a similar experience that how we are sharing, right? I mean, we've never met in person before. A lot of our guests we've never met in person. I mean, again, we started recording in 2020, right? So there was a time where everyone wanted to just
remote.
Remote. But till date, we're in touch with all our guests from our early episodes, right? We'll always meet. As the years have gone on, as people have been traveling around, we've met some of our guests also. It doesn't feel like, oh, you're that guy. It's more like, hey, long time, how have you been? That kind of thing, right? And it's interesting. And I think that's something definitely that I would like to give credit to Nadir and me, right? Because I've worked, again, like I said, in the field of podcasting. It's interesting just to see the approach and the way that we've had, right? And of course, with any creative endeavors, direction changes and things like that happen. But I think that's where it helps to have two people just kind of keep each other online saying, hey, where are we going? What are we kind of doing? And there's so many lessons. I mean, like, one of the interesting things I think, or the most audacious things Nadir and I do is like, let's find a dad who does this, or let's find a dad who's like that. Sure enough, through our connections, we'll find someone. But what's also been interesting is that, and I think there was an entire year that happened, every guest we had, because of the conversation and the kind of experience they had, would always come back to us saying, why don't you talk to X, or why don't you talk to Y? This is a great person who would be a guest on your podcast. And I think that was something that was really reassuring for Nadir and me, that we are on the right path and what we're doing is really being accepted. Because not always do people end up having to say really nice things about you, right? Or end up having great experiences. So that's what I would at least shamelessly take credit for.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, there's so many questions, and I'm sure I would love to talk to you guys for a lot more time. But that I can imagine. And what's encouraging is what you just shared, that there are so many dads that you met along the way who have somehow, they feel like they're doing kind of similar things. They feel the same about parenting, and I'm guessing you have been more and more pleasantly surprised having met all these dads in the community, right? Because you tend to wonder, like, am I the only one thinking like that? Am I the only one feeling like this? But it's great to hear that there's a big community of dads who are wanting to get involved, who are not afraid to do this and get involved and learn from that experience. Yeah.
So just to add quickly, right, and I'll tell you this, and this is also linked to the earlier question that you asked. I remember when my wife when she announced publicly that she was pregnant. And I think as she ended up towards her second and towards the third semester, and I'm pretty sure this was been a very similar experience for Nadir's wife, she started getting added to Facebook groups. She started getting added to WhatsApp groups, breastfeeding support, prenatal classes, all of that, right? And I was like, wait, how come you're getting added to all of this? And like, there's nothing.
I'm not getting added anywhere.
Yeah, like imagine if among all my friend circle and everything, if Nadir was this guy I met who was the only one who was kind of talking to it. When I think about it, and one of the things I've also realized, speaking to my wife, right, is one of the things which is very unique about our generation of parents compared to the earlier generations is that now we're also realizing parenting is a very lonely journey. And lonely, I say, not because of the lack of resources or lack of availability, but also the fact that we're not connecting, right? Because we always have people from an older generation, when notice that generation gap or the gap in just the ideologies, right? So it becomes a very lonely experience. So the moment you have somebody who has kind of just dealt with these experiences that you're going to do, just telling you that, you know what, don't worry. There are days where you will hate yourself, and that's okay. There are
Right.
days where you will be really happy, and that's okay, because there's going to be ups and downs. And I think again, like I said, with mums, it's kind of easier because they connect, right? They go through this physiological change and all of that, and they connect with that. With dads, we're like, what's happening?
What's
Like,
what's my entry point here?
what's my what's do I have to do, or what kind of thing, right? So it's
Yeah.
very different.
Try having a conversation about children with other dads. You'll be surprised how quickly the conversation just ends,
Yeah.
because it has nothing to do with business. It has nothing to do with money. Maybe money comes in when you're saying, this year fees went up by 10%, yaar, right?
Yeah.
Or it has nothing to do with sports unless and until you have somehow managed to put your kid in a very exclusive sports club.
Yeah.
So it all connects to what you have done as a
Yes.
man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But try having a softer conversation with other dads. Maybe in your friend circle, sure, why not? Because you know them, you've known them for a very long time, so you can veer that conversation over there, right?
Well, even there, I feel so honestly. When sharing my own experience, some things I feel very lonely. Honestly, even with my friends who I really love and I hang out, and that's who I hang out with. But when it comes to kids, right, and what you do and how you connect, I stand to sort of find myself in the minority, in the minority of one actually. Because, when you, like you said, when you go into topics like, well, my son was just not feeling it, or I could see that he was struggling with that. When you start using vocabulary which is not in the male's lingo, and you slowly start to see like there's nothing coming back to you, right? Again, no judging of anybody, but it's just how, most of us men have grown up and not being able to express and put words to our emotions and stuff like that.
No, just lack of experience, I think. Like lack
That's
of
true too.
very serious emotional experience.
Yeah.
You don't at least from a man's standpoint, you very rarely try and connect your child with emotions.
Yes.
Your
Because
child
mom is there for
always-
that.
Exactly, right? A child for you is a driver of success.
Yeah.
A driver of money, a driver of he or she will do better than I. Mostly it's a he.
Yeah.
Right? So those conversations, serious conversations need to be had. So point one for me, if I had to leave this podcast on two serious thoughts, one is men need to converse more. When I say men, I mean fathers need
Yes.
to converse more. But for those conversations to happen, you need to be very involved with your child, because unless and until you don't know what's happening in your child's life, that conversation doesn't happen. So it's a two-way street,
That's
right?
right.
You can't just have these very vapid and vacuous conversations, because it'll never work. I'll immediately know that, okay, this guy's clearly not doing anything. But then there's the other end of the spectrum where you have the women. And today, very interesting, I overheard this conversation of this help in the office who works for 7 hours in the office, and then she goes back home and she has 2 kids, I think. And I just overheard this conversation, which was happening in Gujarati, and they didn't realize that I know
understand,
Gujarati. And they just had this conversation. The conversation was this, that why would I put so much pressure on my man to take care of our kids? That is my job. Please leave him alone.
Yeah.
That is not his job.
He's working so hard.
doesn't need
Leave
to
him
do it.
alone.
And I'm like, woman, you are spending 7 hours over here bending backwards and doing so much work. Then you travel 2 hours, go back home, and then you tend to your kids. Why do you make it about yourself?
Yeah.
Your man, your husband reaches earlier. He can do so much. Like in my head, I'm thinking all this.
Yeah.
Obviously, I
Yeah.
couldn't like burst out and say,
Yeah.
wake up, you can't do this.
Yeah.
But again, I keep these things to myself, right?
And
It's
also,
like,
I think the
well,
idea of struggles, right? Like, again, I haven't found myself with many conversations or many instances with other men where, we're talking about our struggles. Hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm just not able to do this shit or not figure this out, particularly when it comes to like parenting stuff. I find like women are so easily able to do that, particularly in good friends, obviously, when they feel safe. It's very, very much more easy to them. So, that's one of the things, like you're saying, that conversation must be had. Like men needs to be able to say, hey, I'm really struggling here and I'm not able to figure this out. And that's, I don't know if you guys felt that in any of your conversations
No,
over the
I
years.
want to add to that. Outside of this platform, outside
Yeah.
of this dad conversations that like-minded people like
Yeah.
you and I are having, the best parenting conversations I have are with other mothers.
There you go.
I kid you not.
There you go. Yeah.
I kid you not. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are Peter and I are part of a dad group.
Yeah.
That dad group never lights up unless the woman in the group initiates a conversation. It's amazing. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not saying, oh yeah, I just start. No, even me, even I don't start conversations.
Right. Right.
So I'm very much to be blamed
Of
also in this
course, we are a
situation.
part of that
Because,
system.
because even I don't do it. When I go to school and I see a bunch of dads, I just stay away from them. I said, because I know they'll probably want to talk about their business or the fancy cars or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I have nothing
Yeah.
to add to that conversation, right? So I'll just move and I'll go hang out with the moms because I'll get all the goss from there. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, oh, is that really what's happening?
Right. Right.
And it's
Right.
just amazing because I learn so much. There's such amazing knowledge going on in that group. But sadly, mother's group, you're not invited.
No.
You'll never be invited because it's their sacred space, right? For them, probably in their heads, they're thinking, "Oh, now you're going to take over this also."
One of the
And
things
I
that
get respect that.
One of the things that I'm trying to find now is going into my children's school parents community. There actually moms are welcoming me because they'll get help, right? You'll do the work. So that's one of my angles of trying to connect with other parents, whether it's moms and dads. But I relate to you. Sometimes I connect with other moms because you're talking about your children, their food and sleep and all that stuff, and they're like, wow, this guy seems to know the day-to-day stuff of their children, which they haven't heard from a lot of dads.
And then they start congratulating you for some reason.
Yeah, apparently you've done a great job there.
Yeah, but and it's so difficult. Like initially, I would gloat. I said, "Yeah, I'm such a great dad." But then I was realized that okay, let's get out of this whole self-congratulatory mode because that is our job. That is exactly why we became parents.
Yes.
Right. So I think women need to stop probably doing that as well.
Yeah.
Don't congratulate your husband.
True.
Freaking
Yeah.
job.
And
He
I
needs to do
want
that.
to add, right? I mean, like, it's also like the various systems that our kids are part of. I had a very similar experience, but actually with teachers. And I remember my son was in the kindergarten, and the teachers had certain observations and stuff like that. So my wife was in a meeting, so I showed up. And the teacher was slightly older, and she looked at me and she said, do you want to have this conversation when your wife is around? And I said, no, I'm fine. I can update her. She's in a meeting. And she looked at me and she was like, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm the same person you see in his online school all the time, right? Like my wife and I take turns. So I'm aware of what's happening in the school and stuff. And you can tell me, we're very clear. But because I kept showing up for these meetings, my wife and I,
Yes.
and things like that, I did see over a period of time towards the end of the term where the teacher actually warmed up because she realized,
Right.
hey, he genuinely gets it. He cares.
Right.
And I was very open. Like, I would tell her, we're struggling. This isn't easy. I was like, I don't know what to do. Because honestly, let's be honest, none of us really know what to do until
No.
we encounter that situation and look behind, right? And I think that's what she kind of appreciated in there. But again, in my son's current school, it's a very similar thing. And I'm realizing that that's one of those things, right? Whereas teachers are not prepared. Or even like, say, for example, my son was going for football. There were times as simple as, I mean, like, is there something not masculine about football? But again, I would find myself sometimes in a minority when I would take him for the football practice. And because it was a big ground, I would say like, hey, wait, while he's practicing, I can also get my steps, walk around, do exercise and stuff like that. So it's also, I think, all of these systems, all of these various places where our kids are, that they need to be more welcoming
Yeah.
towards
Yeah.
dads. And while
Well,
I'm
they have
saying
been
that,
all fed with the history and the stereotypes of what they've been used to, right? So
yeah,
it'll take some time for them to kind of get
yeah.
that perspective change.
But I think while I'm saying that, right, I am seeing more dads come. I'm
Right.
seeing more dads show up in there. And I think when we're looking at just kind of recapping what all we're talking about, from not being present, at least being present is the first step. And then
Yep.
interacting, sharing, talking is all a byproduct later of that. But being present, I think, is one of the most important things. Because, yeah, I'm trying to recall the number of times my dad came for my parent teachers meeting. It was so few. And even then it was also like, you really get that many marks only? What?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that I by the way, Varun was on my show. In fact, he was one of my first guests, which was amazing, and I think he referred to you guys. And in that, he used this word called garbage time with children. Like, there's nothing called like quality time. Like, you should also have garbage time, which is where the real fun and the real experience happens. And yesterday I was listening to a podcast of this guy Farid Zakaria, like who's a big journalist in CNN, right? And the last question in that podcast was about parenting, and fascinatingly, he said, "This whole word of quality time is so overrated. There's nothing called quality time. There is just time that you need to spend with your children." So that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. I mean, I have to be honest, and I can only say this because I do it. Varun, by the way, is a great person to work with, right? Because I've never had any conversation with him where I've had to say that, hey, I have this thing at school, and he's like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
But because I make it a point sometimes to take a break during the middle of the day, go pick up my son from school, and it's exactly garbage time, because if you think about it, all I'm doing is just waiting for him, taking him from the bus. But over a period of time, we've made this ritual where I live across a very popular Irani cafe here in Bombay. So we'd go there and we'll just talk.
Where is that, by the way? I'm curious.
In South Bombay, actually, close to the Metro Cinema.
I miss those Irani cafes. So you're just getting me nostalgic.
Yeah. So we'll just he'll have a snack because he's hungry post school.
Yeah.
We'll just have a talk. He'll tell me about stuff. I'll talk to him. He'll tell me, okay, what are we doing? He'll ask me questions. And there are days where sometimes I feel like everything else I do is insignificant.
Yeah.
That half an hour, 45 minutes that I take a break and I do that.
Just lights you up.
Just makes me, it also gives me perspective, right? Because I was like, all those 8, 10, 12, whatever hours of the day I'm working, like, pale in comparison to this, because this is the time he can tell me whatever he wants. Right. And of course, as a parent, now I know that, this is going to come back many years later. But the fact that he can have these open conversations with me about anything is, I think, something I'll always be grateful for.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, definitely. I can picture that and I relate to that. It's power of rituals, no matter how mundane they are, but repeated over a period of time, that becomes so memorable. Wow, I know we are way over time, and I'm sure you guys feel the same when you have guests, so I don't need to tell you how I'm feeling. You probably relate to that, but I would love to start to kind of wrap this up. It's late in the evening, late in the night. I would love to hear from you how what's your sort of thinking about how do you want to do, where do you want to take this your community to, what's your vision for that community as you think about it? I know there's nothing called the grand vision that we have in life and we all plan on that, but are there some thoughts that you're thinking about in terms of how to broaden, how to deepen the dad's community?
I think it's through conversations. I was reading this one article. There was a survey done a couple of years ago, I think 2021, maybe recently. I forget the dates. and honestly, I wasn't shocked with the results, but the headline was that 84% of the dads in India feel that it's the mother's job to take care of the child,
Mm.
right? Um, I think our collective goal is to bring that number down, like regularly. Today's kids are very different. Right? You cannot hold them. You cannot put them in, the cages of your thoughts. It doesn't work. They'll find it. They'll find a way to get out of it.
Yeah.
And when that happens, they'll just lose all respect for you. But when both parents are involved, right? And there are a lot of studies also that have shown that when both parents are involved, you see the difference in your child's quality, personally as well as professionally, and that is all that we want to put out there, because ultimately, what's the long game? Ultimately, we just want to raise good human beings
Right.
who are good to other human beings, and hopefully that's when society starts changing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes, but at least we can set the gears in motion.
Yes.
And that is extremely crucial, and for that to happen, we need to have more such conversations. We need to have more such podcasts. We need to have more such platforms where people just come and share their stories and have conversations till the point where you realize that it is absolutely okay for a dad to show up at a PTA, and the teachers, who are mostly women, don't get, oh, where is the mothers I was it shouldn't be that.
Right.
The father shows up, oh great, please have a seat, I'd like to talk to you about your child. Very normal conversation. I think that's something, that's a future that I would love to be a part of. Will it happen? I don't know.
Well, that's a worthy aspiration, and I know you're already doing a lot to bring that vision to life. So, but it definitely resonates with me. Thank you for sharing that. Peter,
Yeah.
anything you'd like to add?
When I'm reflecting, right, and I'm going back to that story I said, the fact that my son thinks it's okay for a man to be in a kitchen and cook,
Yeah.
I don't think we need to do a lot more than just show up and be good examples, right? I saw my dad make breakfast for me. That's why I do it, right? And the fact that my son is okay seeing there. Yes, of course, when Nadir and I talk, we always have to acknowledge that we may be outliers, anomalies in the larger society. But the fact that there is change happening, right? The fact that, right now maybe it's WhatsApp groups, but maybe there can be play groups.
Sure.
Or they can be like birthday parties where actually dads show up, right? I mean, we're looking at small stuff. I don't think like the stat that Nadir is saying is going to dramatically change, right?
Shift.
Let's
yeah,
not
yeah.
be very idealistic about it, because we still live in a society. I mean, the three of us itself are living in metros, so it's very easy to have this conversation, right?
We're a very small sliver of the entire
Exactly,
nation.
right?
Yeah,
And I
nation.
think that's one of the things Nadir and I keep reminding ourselves is that we may think this, but like I was talking, it's the systems, it's a society, right, that needs to also kind of be okay with it. And I think just the fact that we show up, we be good examples, the fact that like some of our guests, like I said, right, like that's the reason why we also very particular about the guests that we bring on the podcast, because we know that these are examples that we want stories to be shared.
Yeah,
with
there are a lot
others,
of people who are going to listen to that conversation. So you want
exactly,
to make
right,
sure that
and resonate
Yep, yep.
with it. So
Yes.
I think, I mean, and I think this is slowly we're noticing it at a small level, where we have friends who are now going to be dads are listening to the podcast, and we're like, really, you are listening to us? Why?
Yeah.
Like, but the fact is, when they message us, they're not saying that, oh, this is great. They're like, yeah, you guys, now we get it, right? So yeah, it's going to slowly happen bit by bit, and I mean, it's really, I look forward to that, honestly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm so glad that I'm connected with you both now. And this was a really energizing conversation. I love to be able to stay connected and share our journeys. And along with that curve of 80% or whatever, I also love these little anecdotes, right? Somebody just says something sometimes you see data in terms of these large graphs, and sometimes you have these little stories, and both are equally powerful, right?
Yeah.
So, absolutely. So again, I'll go back to where I started by thanking both of you for having started this amazing platform and community for a lot of families, and I absolutely relate to your cause, and I am happy to join this cause as well. And thanks so much for spending your Thursday night with me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
You have a good night, and we'll talk soon again.